Hello and welcome back to my Let's Play of Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. We're near the end, people. And things are gonna get much more difficult. Oh, jeez. Anyways, continuing along with what I was saying in the previous video about the blocks and whatnot. Essentially, if you can use blocks to hurt the enemies. Another design, another concept that didn't really get used, that I found interesting, was that I don't think we have seen in any stage, except in if you went to the other route, the one with Alucard, weather. Weather would have had a much more important influence in Castlevania 3 than it originally did. The most you got was... I don't even know if it was rain, to be honest. I know it's kind of hard to talk about because we're not on that stage, but it didn't look like rain. It looked like mist. Anyways, how that would have affected a player would be like, oh, it's a lightning storm. Dodge the lightning. Dodge the tree that the lightning struck. This idea wasn't really implemented, but I know for sure that in Castlevania 64, exactly what I'm describing here, where lightning hits a tree and you have to dodge a tree, was something that was used, though not a lot. With this stage, again, it's not particularly difficult. The only difficult part is the final... is the boss. Or more like bosses in this stage. Anyhow. Now, I'm going to be very honest. I had trouble trying to find much information about this video game. And I have a theory as to why there just simply wasn't that much information on this game. I may have given a lot. However, I'm looking at my notes here. I don't think I've written enough. But there's a theory that I've created as to why I think there isn't such much notes about this game in general. And I think this could be said for several other Nintendo games at the time. You see, what you have to understand is that, you know, video games, this was released in the late 80s and in 1990 in America. What you have to understand is that video games were still a relatively new thing. Sure, there was the Tennis for Two that came out in the late 50s, and you know, several decades, a couple of decades already passed by the time this game came out. But we're talking about relative popularity. It wasn't until the 70s where there was a bunch of Pong clones, and then later on in the late 70s, the Atari 2600 came out. This is important to talk about because I think for most people's understanding of video games at the time, I think they just thought it's just gonna be a fad. It's not gonna be important. It's just gonna dissipate and disappear. And it didn't help that the infamous 1983 video game crash happened. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We're heading to the boss here. Right before a save state, of course. Or, yeah, whatever. Now, there's three bosses. The first one you've already seen in a previous episode. Two mummies. Same tactic. Duck down and use holy water to destroy them. The next boss, which you have seen for the third time, is, drumroll, course, Cyclops. It's a Cyclops. Same tactic here. Anyways, continuing along with what I was saying before we get to the final boss, that it's in the middle there, in the middle coffin. The video game crash in 1983 was a huge thing that happened in the video game timeline. You have to understand that during this time there is a saturation of so many consoles, so many video games, which by many consumers were considered poorly made. And so when you're a consumer and you're trying to buy, I don't know, my kid wants this kind of Pong. This Pong has like Pong and 5 games in it, and you could do other things in it. I don't know which one to choose. Here's the third boss, literally Satan. I mean, look at him. And what else could he be? I don't know what his actual name is. I don't know. Diablo. Who cares? Minotaur? No, it's not. That's something else. He's pretty easy. He may look very frightening. He's not. He's just gonna keep jumping. And if you have holy water, it's pretty simple. And that's the end of this stage. So yeah, there's like a bunch of Pong consoles. And, you know, most parents are like, what if the kid doesn't even like it? Wouldn't it be much better for me as the consumer to buy a computer instead? So that is exactly what happened. Many people around this time were like, hey, I'm gonna buy a computer instead. I'm gonna buy a computer instead, and I'm gonna not only be able to play games, but also do other things. I don't know, my taxes. I don't know. And we're near the end. If you notice, yes, this stage indeed looks very similar to the first Castlevania level of the first game, which is pretty neat. Even has the same music. Vampire Killer. I think that's the name of its song. This stage is pretty tough. But it's pretty cool to reference that. I can imagine the kids or some of the adults who played these games or teenagers, and then they got to this stage and like, oh, that's so nice. I remember this a couple of years ago. That's so cool. So going back to the video game crash of 1983, that happened. However, in that same year, something else came out. The Nintendo Entertainment System. And Nintendo was able to revive the markets towards console gaming. And then people were like, oh, there's something good. There's actually some level of order here. You're telling me that there's a seal of approval onto which people have to meet a criteria for? You're telling me that video games, they're being treated with some level of respect, and so you as a consumer can buy these games with better reassurance that what you're getting is not only a much more fulfilling product, but also that it's competent? Of course, that isn't to say that was all games. There's plenty of bad NES games, but when that idea was introduced to the consumer, it's like, yeah, I'm interested. I want to buy this console. I want to buy games for it. However, like I said, this is in the same year. And the effects of the video game crash left a sort of burning mark on the video game industry as a whole. At least for a while. And so people are like, hey, yeah, video games. That's stuff for children, right? And I'm pretty sure, I know for myself, even though I never grew up with these games, I grew up with a much later generation. I'm extremely young. I know for sure when I was a kid, I had interest of how does this work? What's the ins and out of how these things work? What's the planning concept? How was the music developed? Who drew the art? All these things, all these questions. But I think for the average adult consumer, they're like, I don't care. If it pleases my child, then yeah, I'll get it. Here's the next boss, Death. Now, if you're interested in the details of the video game crash of 1983, I recommend looking at some videos on YouTube, or more specifically, what I remember, the Gaming Historian. You should go check him out. Death is just as hard as he was in the first game, except if you have Spyha, you can beat him rather easily. Thank you. Now we're near the end to Count Dracula.